Through the streets of Budapest, I was actually going to meet Judit Polgar. This was during the Chess Olympiad, and along with me was the very famous journalist Leontxo Garcia. These are Judith's study material that she has herself created for kids. It's called the Chess Palace, and these are beautiful set of books. I have a video on it, and the place where the press conference was happening there was a chess board. It was Judit Polgar's Global Chess Festival press conference, and there she was talking to Norbert Fogarasi, the head of Morgan Stanley, which is the sponsor of the Global Chess Festival. So it was a very intimate setup with Judith and Norbert answering a few questions. They were talking about the vision of the Global Chess League. A few journalists had come, and I was sitting there. It was happening in Hungarian, but we had someone right next to us who was translating it. And once this all ended, Judith challenged the few of her opponents to play a game against her on this board, and I was one of them. And my teammates were all decently strong chess players. I was like, okay, this is going to be a fun thing. But as it turns out, it started getting interesting. And Judith was very serious. Whenever she played a game, she would always be like very, very focused. There were a lot of journalists who stood there. And we played the Grand Prix here. And I'm going to take you through this entire game to not only tell you what happened, because you can see here Judith suddenly is on the white side, not on black. So there was a very big twist that happened in between the game. So let me take you to the game and show you what happened. The game started with 1 e4, and Judith responded back with the Sicilian. I knew she was going to play the Sicilian. She loves to attack. And then we decided, should we go for the closed Sicilian? And I think Norbert Fogarasi, who's the head of Morgan Stanley, he is a very big fan of the Grand Prix attack. So he played knight c3, and we quickly reached this position where we put our bishop on b5. And here I was expecting Judith to play knight g7, because that's how you play in such positions. You put your knight on e7. But Judith here played this, I think, a very careless move, d4. And for a second I was like, what? We just took on c6, b takes c6 and knight e2. And I thought to myself, okay, maybe Judith will now play d3. She will push her pawn to d3 and maybe there will be complications. But no, she went knight f6. And that allowed d3, and this is a very, very clear edge for white. And black must play c4 now. Like, try to do something, but even then the position is quite bad. But she played bishop e7, and here we castled, black castled, and then came the move b3. And it was already very, very clear to us, b3 to stop c4, that the position was close to strategically lost for Judith. So we got very excited, because you see, the problem is the c5 pawn is very weak. The c4 square is very weak, and you can actually attack it. Now Judith tried to create some play with a5, a4, but we stopped it with a4. And then she went knight d7. So I was actually very interested to know what would Judith do next. Like, what is the way in which she would create play? She went knight d7, and here a good plan could have been to push the pawn to e5, and then if she goes knight b6, you go knight g3, knight d5, and maybe queen e2 with the idea of knight e4. I think white is doing excellently in this position, but we tried to go for the attack, g4. Not a good idea here, because now she went f5, very strong move, and takes, we went e5, and already the position now gets very complicated. And you could see that there was a smile on Judith's face. She put her knight on b6, and now maybe her idea was knight d5, putting the knight there in the center. But we were in for surprise now, because king h1 was played. She now played bishop e6, good move. We went rook g1. She played the move bishop to d5 here, and knight g3, defending the knight. rook a7, and this was a brilliant move. I was thinking, okay, she wants to bring her rook on the 7th rank and so on, but the multi-purpose of this move is just brilliant. You know what the plan is? She wants to go knight a8 to c7 to e6, and this entire maneuver took Judith less than like couple of minutes to think. So h3, she went knight a8, amazing. King h2, coming out of the pin basically. Knight c7, knight h5, trying to attack g7 pawn, g6, and here she played bd2, and she made a very interesting offer. Here she said, if you think that your position is no longer that great as white, I'm happy to change sides. So it was a very unique offer, and you know, this was, I think, planned beforehand that at some point Judith can make this offer, and if we want to take it, she will play with the other pieces, other color. And so we discussed and we said, yes, we like black's position better here. The bishop is very strong in the center. The knight is coming to blockade the passed pawn on e6, and it looks great. So we said, okay, Judith, you take white now, we'll take black. And she did it. She took, and we played knight e6, and it was already maybe not the best move, but okay, knight e6 looks logical. She went queen e2, king h8, knight f6. Now, sacrificing the pawn, and a very good decision. We here played bishop f6. In fact, in this position, it could also be worthwhile to consider an exchange sack with rook takes f6, ef6, and now playing bishop d6 with the idea of queen f6. Very tough to play this, especially like, you know, against Judith. So we took on f6, ef, bishop f3, because if we took rook f6 or queen f6, we were afraid that the knight would jump to the e5 square. So we first took the knight, queen takes, and now queen d5 was played to trade the queens and at the same time then win the f6 pawn. So she took, pawn takes, played her rook to e1, and we took the pawn on f6, saying, oh, we are pawn up, everything is great, looking good. But Judith actually understood the position much better. She went for the move rook e5, and now the d5 pawn is hanging. And you can see that when you're playing a super GM like Judith, how very quickly from a position that looked good for us maybe 4 moves ago, we've landed in a position that's slightly worse for us. D5 was very difficult to defend somehow because, you know, knight c7, we were dabbling with this idea, oh, let's save the pawn, but then we didn't like rook e7, pinning the knight, it looked too passive. If you try to save with the rook, the a5 pawn is hanging, and so all of these things didn't look great. So we pushed the pawn to c4, trying to get some active counterplay. She took, and now we went rook c7, and the position, I think the c4 move did unsettle her a bit here. So we got a good position, rook c7, rook e1 attacking the knight, and we played rook c6, again a good move. The point was, if she took on a5, we'll take on f4. She did take it, and we took here. She played her pawn to c5, and I think this was a key moment where we should have brought the king in to the game, you know, king g7, king f7, and maybe the position is still defendable, but we went knight e6, and this was the bad move. This just led to a lost position with bishop b6. Beautiful move. Now the a pawn is very, very powerful, because earlier the thing was, if you went king g7 and she went bishop b6, now trying to push the pawn, we could create our own counterplay with d3, you know, create something there. The fork could come in on d3 and stuff. But also we were considering that instead of king g7, if rook a6 made more sense, but that also maybe not the best move. The knight e6 move turned out to be not a great idea. Bishop b6, knight g5. We tried to threaten a fork, but now Judith's conversion was just phenomenal. Check, and she started pushing the pawns. And I really like this last moment here where she played rook b7 check, because king f6, there's bishop d8. So that's the reason why I had to go on the last rank. And a6, a7 was coming, and we resigned the game. And Judith won. This was truly a memorable encounter for me, because on one hand, Judith didn't play the opening carefully, got into a lost position almost strategically, but then fought back and then got an advantage, then again gave it up by turning over the colors, took slightly inferior position, again converted that into a win, and it just went on to show me how strong she was as an active player and still is right now. I hope you enjoyed this entire video. Kudos to Judith. This is Sagar Shah signing off. Bye bye.